Good morning everyone, my name is Ritesh and today we'll discuss current affairs topic. And today's topic is Houthi attack, right? So this is the topic of our, this is the topic today we are going to discuss. Now let's start start with this, start first with the editorial of this topic, right? So there was an editorial related to this topic, which is how the attack, which was recently going on, right? So this is the editorial, right? It was being mentioned in, I think, the Hindu Times or the Wire, I guess. So this was the editorial basically, which talks about the Saudi attack and all those activities that was going on and before the attack, right? And who were the accused people there, right? So just first read this particular editorial first. For example, I'll start with this editorial, and then we'll discuss each and every topic related, which is like relevant for your examination point of view, because there are so many static topics here, because there are organizations which are being inspired by the previous era, right? So what was the activities that was going on within the countries, right? So we'll discuss all these things in detail here, right? So let us start with this editorial first. Now, for the editorial starts with the Saudi-led coalition in which the UAE was a part started bombing Yemen in 2015, hoping to swiftly dislodge the Houthi rebels from Sana'a and reinstate the government of Mansour Hadi in the capital. So almost 7 years later, the Iran-backed Houthis who were holed up in northern Yemen and began counter-attacks with missiles and drones into Saudi Arabia have explained the war all the way to the Gulf coast of the UAE. Monday's drone attacks on Abu Dhabi by Houthis, in which 2 Indians and a Pakistani were killed, were a message to the Emiratis on what they are capable of. It may not be a coincidence that the attacks were carried out at a time when the UAE-backed forces have been making slow gains in Yemen's conflict against the Houthis. But the UAE's involvement in Yemen has had many turns. It quit the Saudi-led coalition in 2020 as the war had hit a stalemate. Since then, the Emiratis have provided tactical support to the Southern Transitional Council, a separatist body in southern Yemen that drove the Saudi-backed forces loyal to President Hadi out of Aden. Now, the dynamics changed again when the Houthis began pushing into territories outside their stronghold, especially Marib. If they take Marib, they would be a step ahead to push into the south. Faced with prospects of further Houthi territorial gains, UAE-backed forces such as Giant Brigades, a militia from the south, have joined hands with the government. Then came the Abu Dhabi attacks. These could escalate the conflict. The immediate response from the Saudi-led coalition has been to carry out a massive airstrike on the partly destroyed Sana'a. So basically, this first paragraph of this whole editorial talks about the recent attacks that was being held in so many different areas, right? So they talked about the capital city, they talked about the city Sana'a, which was being destroyed by a massive airstrike, right? So these are the terms which are basically telling you that these areas, these places are important. Why? Because again, the direct questions come from these points, from these places, right? Like for example, this keyword, the last word of this topic, basically Sana'a. So what is Sana'a? So it is the city, right? It is the capital city. So these things are being mentioned here, and the main attack wala part, I'll discuss that whole part in my next slide, right? So the next paragraph of the editorial says the UAE has vowed retaliation. How the strike to scare away the Emiratis from Yemen could trigger the opposite reaction from Abu Dhabi, which now has powerful proxies in the south. So again, see here, they are talking about the north and south of the country, right? And they are being polarized, right? So these polarization we'll discuss later, but I'm giving you a hint that they are talking about the north part of the country and also the south part of the country, right? Then the cycle of violence spells tragic news for Yemen's 30 million people, for whom the country has been turned into what UNICEF has called a living hell. Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the Arab world, is facing a three-way crisis. Thousands have been killed in the conflict, many more abandoned or suffering by the collapse of the government and social services and mass hunger. Now, the first step to address this tragedy is to end the fighting, but unfortunately, the parties in the conflict and their regional backers are keen on escalating the conflict further rather than finding a solution. Right? If the fighting over the last 7 years holds any lesson, it is that there can be no military solution to Yemen's problems. To dial down tensions, there have to be talks not only between the rebels, separatists and the government, but also between their backers, Iran, the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Now, if these regional powers agree to rein in their proxies and work towards rebuilding Yemen, that would also help them restore stability and security in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, again, this was the whole editorial which talked about the Houthi attacks. Now, you have to analyze the countries which were participating in these topics, right? So here, Iran, UAE, Saudi Arabia, these are the countries that were being mentioned in this editorial at first. Then there are so many cities that are being mentioned there. So you have to take out these things from the editorial. You have to take out the places where belong to the countries which were being mentioned in the editorial and what was their activity or what was their stand on this particular issue, because they are being mentioned. Now, the last paragraph basically talks about the ideas and the solutions behind this Houthi attack, that how to actually make a peaceful agreement out of it, right? In which every country is happy, if every country is happy to with each other, right? So this was basically the editorial. Just read once again if you want to. Now I'll start with the topic which is related to this editorial, and we'll explain the whole topic, which is the Houthi attack, right? Now, the Houthi attack. Now, what is this, the Houthi attack? First thing. So, you have to remember why this particular thing was in news. You have read this editorial in this slide, right? In the previous slide. Now, this Houthi attack, why it was in news? Obviously, there was an attack. That is why I termed this thing as Houthi attack. Now, why and what are the reasons behind this? Let us discuss all these things in detail now. Now, a suspected drone attack happened in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, right, the capital of UAE, in which 2 Indians and also Pakistani were killed, right. So, there was a suspected drone attack which happened in Abu Dhabi, which is actually the capital of UAE, right. And this attack caused so many harms, in which also 2 Indians were killed and also Pakistani were also killed, right. Now, this Houthi attack, the Shia Houthi rebels of Yemen, right? So this is these are the peoples that live in Yemen, Shia Houthi rebels of Yemen, who have been controlling the northern parts of the country. So this particular Houthi rebels, and which are actually Shia, right? So these Shia Houthi rebels actually control the northern part of the country. That is why I mentioned in the editorial itself that there are 2 areas that this editorial is also mentioning, that north part of the country and also the southern part of the country, and these are being controlled by different authorities, right? So here here it is said that the northern part of the country of Yemen, which is of Yemen basically controlled by the Shia Houthi rebels, right? They also include the capital Sana'a, which already being mentioned in the editorial also, right? It also include the capital Sana'a. For almost 7 years have claimed responsibility for that attack. So basically the idea is that the Houthi rebels, right, they claimed that this attack was basically his activity, right? So they are responsible for this attack. They have claimed that they are being responsible for this particular attack, right? And these things, the capital Sana'a and the northern part of the country being controlled by this particular rebels, right? So this is just a fact for you to just remember these particular things. Now, in earlier 2021 itself, there was a ballistic missile attack by the Houthis on Saudi capital Riyadh. Now, recently there was a attack on Yemen, right? Now, sorry. So recently there was an attack in Abu Dhabi, right? Now in early 2021 itself, there was also attack, ballistic missile attack by the Houthis on also the capital of Saudi capital, basically Riyadh, right? So these Houthi rebels are very violent, obviously, because they have been attacking so many different cities and capitals of these countries, right? So there are two instances in which you can actually claim that because there was an attack in Riyadh. It happened in early 2021, and recently there was an attack in Abu Dhabi, and both were being done by actually the Houthi rebels, right? So next, now let us discuss. Now we have understood this thing, that why this particular Houthi attack was in news, who are actually claiming these attacks and where this attack happened, right? Now we'll discuss the Houthi basically, right? So by mid 20th century, Yemen divided into two countries, right? So this Yemen basically divided into two countries, right? And it happened in by mid 20th century. Now it divided into two parts, like northern and obviously the southern part. Now the northern Yemen were ruled by Zaydi Imams, right? So the northern Yemen were ruled by Zaydi Imams, and the southern were ruled by a British colony, right? So there was a dispute between these two parts, right? Because northern part was ruled by Zaydi Imams and the southern part was basically a British colony. So there must be a dispute because they're not like-minded people, right? So that was the whole issue. So, but in 1962, Egypt took control of Sana'a and established Yemen Arab Republic, right? So after that, in 1962, Egypt took control of Sana'a, which is actually basically capital city, right? So capital city, it's just a city. So Egypt took control of Sana'a and then established a Yemen Arab Republic, right? And this happened in 1962. So this is very important. So you can expect questions from this topic as like, when did Yemen Arab Republic form? So it was in 1962. And who formed this? So Egypt established this particular thing, right? So again, two questions now solved. Now, after 1962, this conflict lasted till 1967 when these Egyptian soldiers were evacuated, right? So, in 1962, basically Egypt took control of Sana'a and they established the Yemen Arab Republic. But this conflict happened till 1967 when actually Egyptian soldiers who were there in those parts were evacuated from this place, right? Now, the North and South Yemen merged in 1990 to form Republic of Yemen. So basically, if you are considering this is basically a timeline of the whole country, Yemen, right? So first this happened, then 1962, Egypt took control of that place. Then in 1967, conflict lasted when these Egyptian soldiers were evacuated from that particular place, but then North and South Yemen merged in 1990 to form basically a Republic of Yemen, right? So these timelines are very important for you. Now, Zaydis, who are basically a minority predominantly settled in North, always accused the central leadership for marginalizing and discriminating them. Now, these Zaydis people who are basically in minority, right, they predominantly settled in northern parts of the country. Earlier also you have witnessed that the northern Yemen were ruled by Zaydi Imams, right? So these were basically minority and predominantly settled in the northern part of the country, right? And from starting also, because they were in dispute with the other half, right? So they basically accuse the leadership, they accuse the central leadership, right, for marginalizing them, for discriminating them, right? So these were the accusations made by the Zaydis against basically the main leadership, central leadership, right? So basically now we have talked about the Yemen and the country's timeline, right? Now this Houthi movement, the root of this movement, basically we can trace this movement to believing youth, right? So there was this was a basically Zaydi revivalist group, and it was founded by Hussein al-Houthi, right? So this was a people. These were the people who actually formed this particular group called Believing Group, and this was basically Zaydi revivalist group, right? And this was formed by this Hussein al-Houthi and his father, right? And these for example, this Believing Youth, this was basically formed in the early 90s, right? Then Badr al-Din and his sons started building vast social and religious networks among the Zaydis of Yemen, who make up roughly 1/3 of the Sunni majority country's population, right? So this again, the Houthis founder, basically the father and the sons, they started building their capital. They started building their vast religious and social networks among these Zaydis of Yemen. So basically all these people who were living in Yemen and who belonged to Zaydis, so they were actually collecting all of them. They were taking supports of all these peoples, right? So they started these things in the early 90s after the formation of this particular group, and formation of this basically revivalist group, Zaydi revivalist group. Now these people actually call themselves Ansar Allah, which is known as partitions of God, right? They mobilized tribesmen in the north against the government. So this was the main agenda of these people. They call themselves Ansar Allah, basically, which means partitions of God, and they mobilized all these tribesmen in the north because they were the dominant people in the north. Even then, even though they were in minority, but still they were dominant. They were having dominant position in the northern part of the country, right? So they started collecting, mobilizing these tribesmen who were living in the north against the government, because they were obviously, the whole idea was against the government. They accused throughout their life that these governments have actually discriminated them or even marginalized them, right? Then so these things were started all over again in the early 90s with the particular group called Believing Youth, right? Now next is the Houthis. Now the term Houthis is basically a prominent tribe, right, who adhere to Zaydi Shia school of thought, right? And they are basically similar to Sunnis, right? So Houthis is basically just a tribe who adhere to Zaydi Shia school of thought. That's it. You have to remember this, that Houthis are the people who are basically prominent tribe who adhere to the Zaydi Shia school of thought, and they are basically similar to Sunni, right? So this is the main thing about the Houthis, and these are the basically factual things related to Houthis. Now in Yemen, Ali Abdullah Shah was the president, and he was the president of Yemen till 2011, right? So he was Ali Abdullah Shah was the president of Yemen till 2011, right? So till 2011, so many things happened. So many things happened under the leadership of this particular president, basically, right? So in 2004, Salah's government, basically this president's government, issued an arrest warrant against Hussein al-Houthi, right? Who are now in 2004, president issued an arrest warrant against the founder of the group of Houthis, right? Who is known as Hussein al-Houthi. So they issued an arrest warrant against this particular person who was the founder of this Zaydi revivalist group. Now he resisted the arrest. Now this Houthi these people resisted the arrest, and they started an insurgency, right? So they started this particular thing. They started an insurgency. Now in September 2004, after the arrest warrant, the government troops attacked the rebels and killed Hussein. Now after the arrest warrant, they actually attacked the rebels and actually killed the founder of this Houthi group leader. Since then, the government launched multiple military campaigns in Salah and Zaydi stronghold to end the resistance, which was locally called the Houthis movement after their martyred leader. See, the main thing happened here is, first they issued an arrest warrant against this particular person. Then that person, tribe, or that particular tribesmen, they all resisted this particular arrest and started an insurgency. After this insurgency has been started, the government started attacking these rebels, and finally they killed the founder of this revivalist group, which was Houthi, right? Now, obviously, because their leader is now being killed by the government, they have this tendency of taking revenge from these government people, right? So this particular thing, this killing of founder of this Houthi, actually strengthened the Houthis, right? Because this gives them a main idea that because of this particular reason, their leader is being killed. So why to drop this particular region, right? Why not to pursue it? So this incident actually strengthened the Houthis, who by 2010, when a ceasefire was reached, had captured Sada from the government troops. Now this Sada was under government, but in 2010, by ceasefire, they captured Sada from the government, right? So this was again after the killing of their leader. This was the first achievement of these people, that they captured a particular city from the government itself, right? Now you have understood the term Houthis, where it came from, the main idea, the main timeline of the country also. Now let's talk about the Zaydis people, right? So these are, now what we know is now that the Houthis are the tribesmen, Houthis are the rebels who adhere to Zaydis Shia, right? And they are similar to Sunni. Now what is Zaydi, right? So Zaydis are basically the oldest branch of the Shia, right? So Zaydis are basically the oldest branch of Shia. Now these Zaydis are named after Zayd bin Ali, the great grandson of Imam Ali, Prophet Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. So this is basically just to have a basic idea about how they are related, and also they are basically related to the Prophet Muhammad, right? Because Zaydis are named after this particular person who was basically related to Prophet Muhammad, right? So, if you first point, if you want to remember of Zaydi, is that they are the oldest branch of Shia. This is the first thing that you have to remember, and then you have to remember that this this particular Zaydis, this named after which people basically. So Zayd bin Ali. Now, next is that Zayd bin Ali had led a revolt against the Umayyad Caliphate in the 8th century. Now, this particular person also led a revolt against the Umayyad Caliphate in the 8th century. Right? He was killed, but his martyrdom led to the rise of the Zaydi sect. Now, he was also killed, but because of that particular thing, it also led to the rise of Zaydi sect. Right? After this particular person's death, these peoples contributed their everything towards him. They don't want to drop the reason this particular person was fighting. So again, all these things happen because of the people they are involved in, because the society they live in, right? Because in these cases, two leaders were killed. One is that I told you this Houthi, the founder of the Houthi Zaydi revivalist group, were also killed. But it at the end, it strengthened these people's motive. It strengthened these people's ideas, and the motivation was much bigger. Now, in these Zaydis case also, after the killing of that person, after the killing of the Zayd bin Ali, these peoples are motivated, and this gives rise to the Zaydi sect, basically. Right? Now, let's come to the Ottoman Empire timeline, right? So, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1918, right? So, these Zaydis would establish a monarchy in the country, but the dominance would come to an end in 1962, when I said that this Egypt-backed republicans overthrew the monarchy, right? So these dots will connect again, right? It starts with the when Ottoman Empire fell in 1918, and when Zaydis actually established a monarchy in the country, but their dominance ended in 1962 when Egypt, again, which I mentioned, that in 1962 Egypt took control of Sana'a and established the Yemen Arab Republic, right? So this monarchy existed till 1962, right? So now we have understood the Zaydis. Again, I'm literally discussing this topic again and again because there are so many terms related to that. Because Houthis is one thing, then Zaydis, right? So these people belong to some other sect and all. So just keep calm and just make a quick note of these people's names and these terms. That's it. Now let's talk about the Houthis rise. How we have discussed how they actually form, how they revolt against the government, and how they basically claim some territory also from the government troops itself, right? So now let's discuss the Houthis rise in this particular topic, right? So President Salah was there, right? Who was a Zaydi, who was in power for 33 years, right? So President Salah was a Zaydi who was basically in power for 33 years, resigned in November 2011. I already told you because he was the president till 2011. So he basically resigned in November 2011. He handed the reins to his deputy Abdrabu Mansoor Hadi, a Saudi-backed Sunni. So basically, this president, who was a Salah, who was basically Zaydi, in November 2011, he resigned from that position and handed his reign to his deputy, basically, and who was a Saudi-backed Sunni. Now, Yemen, under the tutelage of Arabia and the UAE, started a national dialogue to resolve internal differences, right? So Yemen started talking about their internal disturbances, and they want to just conclude this particular thing. They don't want to continue all this particular thing. They just want a resolution over this particular thing. They want their dispute to just completely vanish internally, right? And UAE and again Saudi Arabia was actually helping them, right? So from there they started national dialogue to resolve internal differences. Now the Houthis were also a part of this dialogue, right? Because Yemen started talking about their internal differences and they started a dialogue with these two countries. So Houthis were one of the reasons behind this. So Houthis were also a part of this dialogue. Now, but what happened? They wanted to, but what actually happened? So, but they fell out with the transitional government of Mr. Hadi, basically claiming that the proposed federal solution, which sought to divide the Zaydi-dominated north into two landlocked provinces, was intended to weaken the movement, right? So again, this basically the division of this Zaydi-dominated north into two landlocked provinces, right? This weakened the movement basically, right? So again, the division thing started making an issue here, right? Because there are so many parties, how these were the people who were in dominant position in northern part of the country. Now they were talking about their own issue, right? So everyone talked about their own issue in here, right? Now, because again the talk doesn't go well, so they soon got back into insurgency. Salah, who was basically sidelined by the interim government and its backers, joined hand with his former rivals and launched a joint military operation, right? So Salah was basically the president earlier who actually resigned and handed over his authority to his deputy, right? Now he joined hands with his former rivals and launched a joint military operation. And by January 2015, the Houthi and Salah alliance had captured Sana'a and much of northern Yemen, including the vital Red Sea coast. Later, the Saudis turned against Salah and killed him in December 2017. Now, this was basically the whole rise and fall of this particular Houthis, right? You have understood the whole thing, the countries involved here, the people involved here basically who were the founder of this particular. So in the last slide also talks about that this President Salah, right, who was basically who actually handed over his reins to his deputy. In the end, he later joined hands with Houthis, right? And with the Houthis, they captured Sana'a and also much of northern Yemen, right? But after 2 years, the Houthis again killed Salah, and in December 2017, basically the Houthis turned against Salah and basically killed them. Now let us discuss now there are 3-4 topics under this particular point, under this particular topic. So first is Saudi Arabia attack on women, Yemen, right? So in this, the rapid rise of the Houthis in Yemen set off alarm bells in Saudi Arabia, which saw them as an Iranian proxies. Now what happened here is there was so many people. There was like a rapid rise of Houthis people in Yemen, right? So in Yemen, there are so many people. There's so many Houthis people who were getting mobilized in that particular country, and basically in the northern part, they were the people. They were the dominant people, right? So this was the alarm bell which basically gets on after this particular issue. Saudi Arabia turned over this particular issue and saw these people, which is Houthis people, as Iranian proxies, right? And Saudi Arabia started a military campaign in March 2015, hoping for a quick victory against the Houthis, right? So Saudi, after this again alarming thing, which and also Saudi Arabia saw them as something very dangerous. So they started military campaign in March 2015 and they hope for a quick victory against the Houthis, because basically they think that they are just a tribesmen who think about some who have certain ideologies, but they hope that they'll have a quick victory against these Houthis people. But this hadn't happened. The Houthis had dug in, refusing to leave despite Saudi Arabia's. So the Houthis said that they will not leave the particular country. They will not leave Yemen, right? And in the past 6 years, the Houthis have launched multiple attacks on Saudi cities from northern Yemen in retaliation for Saudi air attacks. Now Saudi attacks Yemen, northern Yemen, and then in retaliation, this Houthis people, they also attacked in retaliation from the northern Yemen, right? Now, but in 2019, the Houthis claimed the attack on 2 Saudi oil installations that knocked out briefly half of the kingdom's oil output. So basically, this all is a very violent. These are all the violent attacks that was basically happening between Houthis and Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia attacked Houthis, and then in retaliation again Houthis attacked Saudi Arabia. So basically the thing is, पहले Saudis ने सोचा कि ये Houthis people are basically dangerous to the country basically Saudi Arabia, right? So after this revelation, they started military campaign, right, against this Houthi people. But Houthi people, in retaliation, Houthi people also said that they won't leave northern Yemen, they won't leave this country. And after that, they are just polar opposite parties which are basically fighting against each other all the time. One such thing is that one such serious issue here is that the Houthis attack on Saudi oil installations, right? Because it knocked out half of the kingdom's oil output. So this is basically one of the biggest losses of Saudi Arabia, right? Now the Houthis also established a government in the north. There are serious allegations against both the Saudis and the Houthis in the war. So basically, again, because they are having a dominant position in the northern part of the country, so they established a government also there, right? While the Saudi bombing caused a large number of civilian deaths, the Houthis were accused by right groups and governments of preventing aid, deploying forces in densely populated areas, and using excessive force against civilians and peaceful protesters. So, again, both these parties are fighting. Saudis are attacking on Yemen. Yemen from northern Yemen are attacking on Saudis. So again, they both are being accused of different issues here, right? You don't have to go into the different issues that these peoples are involved in, right? So you just only have to remember what was the main case, what was the main reason behind all these particular issue. Now we have understood. First, we understood Houthis, then we come on Zaydis, then we discussed about Saudi attack on Yemen or Saudi attack on Houthis. Now we'll discuss the Houthis attack on UAE. So in 2018, when the UAE backed forces were making advances in Yemen, the Houthis claimed attacks against the Emirates, right? So again, because the UAE backed forces were making advances in Yemen to throw out these people, basically the Houthis people, the Houthis also claimed attacks against these Emirates. Since then, the UAE pulled out its troops from Yemen. After that, UAE pulled out their forces from Yemen and offered tactical support to the Southern Transitional Council, a group of rebels based in Aden that was also fighting the Saudi-backed government forces of UAE. Right? So this was the particular thing. After this, basically the attack against the Emirates, UAE pulled out all their troops from Yemen, right? And they offered tactical support to this particular council, right? Who was also fighting against the Saudi-backed government forces of UAE. Right? And during this particular period, the Houthis stayed focused entirely on Saudi Arabia and Saudi-backed forces inside Yemen. So after the UAE draw back their forces, right, the Houthis stay focused on Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabia-backed forces in Yemen, because they have backed some forces in Yemen to dislocate these peoples, right? But if we talk about the recent months, Giants Brigades, a militia group, basically this Giants Brigades is basically a militia group largely made up of southern Yemens, right? And the joint forces turned their guns against the Saudis. So this was a militia group which is basically made up of southern Yemens and the joint forces, the militia led by a nephew of former President Salah, turned their guns against Houthis. So they basically turned their guns against Saudis. Now with the attacks, the Houthis appeared to have sent a clear message to the Emiratis: stay out of Yemen or face more attacks. So this was basically again, if we are talking about attacks on these peoples or these countries, so there are multiple attacks that has happened, right? Because one country attacked another, and then in retaliation, that country attacked this particular country again. So this is the main process which they were going on, right? So now now just two more points that we have to discuss here. First one is the concern over this particular issue, and then we'll talk about the India. What was the India stand over this? Now let's talk about concern first. Now first concern here is that the Yemen position. It means the geographical position of Yemen is very important, because Yemen is strategically important because it sits on a strait linking the Red Sea with the Gulf of Aden, through which much of the world's oil shipments pass. Now because Yemen has such strategical, basically this country has a very good position in the geography, right? In map you'll find it sits on a strait linking the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, and because much of the world's oil shipment pass through this region, that's why Yemen's position is very important, right? So this becomes a serious issue, because if that country is under attack, or if there's a group that is very violent inside there, so the commercial going of these oil shipments and all will get hampered, right? So this is the first concern. Second is, it also worries the West because of the threat of attacks such as from Al-Qaeda or IS affiliates emanating from the country as it becomes more unstable, right? See, second concern is from the West because they are also talking about the violent groups like Al-Qaeda or IS, right? And because Yemen is now an unstable country because there are so many violent groups that are being established there. So this is the second issue, that the countries from the West are also are also aware of this particular issue first, and they are also talking about this particular thing, and they also worry about this issue, that how we will emerge from this particular position, because Yemen has a strong foothold in the map, right? Next point is that the Houthis have escalated cross-border attacks on the kingdom even after the US delisted the rebel as terrorist and stepped up efforts to de-escalate the 6-year conflict. Right? So now the US even delisted these rebels as terrorists, still they are going on, right? They escalated cross-border attacks, right? Yeah, they stepped up efforts to de-escalate the 6-year conflict, right? So these things are, see, the third reason is again the violent nature of these groups, right? Even they are being classified as some rebel groups as terrorists, still they are throwing so many violent attacks on each other. Last concern here is that the conflict is also seen as a part of a regional power struggle between Shia-ruled Iran and Sunni-ruled Saudi Arabia, right? So this is again, this is a regional power struggle. This is seen as a regional power struggle between Shia-ruled Iran and Sunni-ruled Saudi Arabia. So this was basically concern. See, the concern part is only for you to understand the whole issue and what you can take it up from here, right? Now let's talk about India and India's position. So now for India, it is a very challenging thing, right? And which cannot be washed away, taking into consideration that oil security and 8 million expats living in the region with more than 80 billion US dollars of incoming remittance annually. So again, if we talk about economic point of view, this is very important. What this country is contributing to us, or what we are getting from this country, right? Because they are having so much oil in that particular country, so it becomes a very serious issue, because we are importing oils from these particular countries, right? So it becomes a very serious issue for India as well. Second one is, India launched a massive air and sea operation to evacuate over 4,000 Indian nationals from Yemen in April 2015, which is also called Operation Rahat, right? So this was related to Yemen, that is why I have mentioned here, and the operation with which it is related to, because it can be directly asked from in your examination that which operation was launched by India to evacuate 4,000 Indian nationals from Yemen, right? Now, next is, India has provided food and medical aid to Yemen in the past, and thousands of Yemeni nationals have availed of medical treatment in India. So, India have provided medical aid to these peoples. India also continues to facilitate the education of a large number of Yemeni nationals, right, in various Indian institutions. So, if we conclude this whole topic, right, what is important for you in here is, first is that this Houthi attack, why this particular thing is news, the countries involved in these, in pointers you have to remember the timeline of Yemen first, the timeline of Houthi, the timeline of Zaydis as well, right? So Houthi, Yemen and Zaydis, these three things you have to remember. Then, which are the countries that were being involved in this particular issue, and which are the people, people who are basically the founder of a group or anything, then that becomes important. So, you have to remember the name of the founder of those groups, right? Then next, just have a read this particular thing, and you will get a whole idea otherwise, right? So thank you so much for this particular topic, right?